Dr. Jason Wells adjusted his collar one final time before entering the crystalline chamber. At the heart of the intercultural exchange dome, 3 weeks of tense negotiations had led to this moment, the first formal cultural exchange between humanity and the Valeri Republic. The walls around him pulsed with a soft blue luminescence that reminded him of deep ocean waters, while geometric patterns etched into the crystal caught and refracted the light into mesmerizing displays. Dr. Wells, came a melodious voice from across the chamber. Ambassador Kithara glided forward, her pale blue skin seeming to glow in the chamber's ethereal light. Golden curls framed her angular face, and her amber eyes held an intelligence that had impressed him throughout their preliminary meetings. Behind her, 3 other Valeri stood in formation to guards and what appeared to be a scholar. Ambassador. Jason nodded respectfully. I appreciate you inviting me to participate in this purity ritual. I have to admit, the translation protocols weren't entirely clear about what it involves. Kithra's lips curved into what he'd learned was the Valeri equivalent of a gentle smile. It is a sacred tradition, Dr. Wells, one of cleansing and openness between those who would share knowledge and space. We ask that you approach with reverence for both our customs and the significance of this moment. Guard Captain Valessa, a tall warrior with intricate scarification along her arms, stepped forward. The ritual requires complete honesty and vulnerability. Human, you must shed all pretense and artifice. Jason nodded, thinking he understood. After years of working in sterile laboratory environments and decontamination chambers, he assumed this was some kind of advanced cleaning procedure, perhaps involving energy fields or chemical baths that required minimal clothing. Of course, I've been through similar protocols before first contact with new ecosystems. Scholar Thiessen, the youngest of the group with bright copper hair, activated a recording device. We shall document this exchange for future cultural analysis. Shall we begin? Kithara gestured to the center of the chamber, where a circle of glowing crystals had been arranged on the floor. Jason stepped into the circle and began the process. He'd done hundreds of times before efficiently removing his outer uniform jacket and placing it neatly aside. He loosened his tie and began unbuttoning his shirt. His movements practiced and clinical. The change in the chamber's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Thiessen's recording device clattered to the crystalline floor. Valessa's hand instinctively moved to the ceremonial blade at her side before freezing mid-motion. Several other Valeri who had been observing from alcoves round the chamber gasped audibly. But it was Kithra's reaction that made Jason pause. With his shirt halfway off, the ambassador's amber eyes had gone wide, her pupils dilated. A flush of deeper blue spread across her cheeks and down her neck, something he'd never seen in a Valeri before. Dr. Wells, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you doing? Jason looked around the chamber, suddenly aware that something had gone terribly wrong. The crystalline walls seemed to pulse faster, responding to the elevated emotional state of their occupants. I'm preparing for the ritual, removing potential contaminants as requested. By the ancient codes, Valessa breathed, her scarred hands still hovering near her weapon. He reveals himself as if it were nothing. Thiessen had recovered her device, but held it with trembling hands. In 300 cycles of life, I have never witnessed such audacity. Kithara stepped closer, her movements careful and deliberate. Jason could see her struggling with some internal conflict, her scientific curiosity warring with what was clearly cultural shock. Dr. Wells, do you understand what you have just done? Apparently not, Jason replied, keeping his shirt partially open but making no further moves. Could you help me understand what's happening here? The ambassador's gaze swept over his exposed chest, the first time any Valeri had seen human anatomy. Outside of medical holographs, her voice was barely steady when she spoke. Among my people, the physical form is sacred. We do not reveal ourselves to others, only to bonded pairs, to family, to those with whom we share the deepest intimacy. Jason felt heat rise in his own cheeks as understanding dawned. Oh no. I've just exposed yourself to our ambassador as if she were your life mate, Valessa finished, though her tone held more wonder than anger. But instead of demanding he leave or calling for sanctions, Kithara did something that surprised everyone in the chamber, including herself. She stepped even closer, close enough that Jason could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. "Tell me, Dr. Wells," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of scientific fascination and something deeper, more personal. "How is it that your species approaches physical form with such ease, such lack of shame or reservation?" The question hung in the air between them, charged with implications neither fully understood yet. Around them, the crystal walls pulsed, with anticipation, as if the dome itself sensed that this moment of cultural collision might become something far more significant than anyone had planned. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, electric with possibility and misunderstanding. Jason's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the play of emotions across Kithara's face. Shock, curiosity, and something that looked almost like hunger for knowledge. "Your question deserves an honest answer, Ambassador," Jason said carefully, his shirt still hanging open. "For humans, the physical body is functional. In scientific and medical contexts, we view it as a biological system to be studied and understood. There's no inherent shame in anatomical reality." Kithara's amber eyes tracked the movement of his chest as he breathed, clearly fascinated by the differences in human physiology. "You speak of it as if it were merely machinery." "Not merely," Jason corrected, noting how her pupils dilated when he shifted slightly. "But we don't attach the same cultural significance to exposure that you do. In medical school, we study cadavers. In research, we document physical responses. The body is a tool for living, not a sacred mystery." Thiessen stepped closer, her recording forgotten. "But surely you must have intimate customs, ways of showing trust and vulnerability?" Jason found himself studying the young scholar's expression, the same mixture of scientific fascination and cultural shock he'd seen in Kithara. "We do. But they're more about emotional openness than physical concealment. We might share our fears, our failures, our deepest thoughts before we share our bodies." "Fascinating," Valessa murmured, her hand finally dropping from her weapon. "You reveal the physical form as easily as breathing, yet guard your emotional truths." "The opposite of our ways," Kithara added softly, her voice carrying an odd note. "We may speak openly of our thoughts and feelings, but the physical form—" She gestured helplessly. Jason noticed how her gaze kept returning to his exposed chest, lingering on the differences in bone structure, muscle distribution, the scattering of hair across his skin. "May I ask you something, Ambassador? Given the circumstances, formality seems inadequate. Please, call me Kithara." "Kithara," he said, enjoying the way her name felt on his tongue. "What do you see when you look at me? What's different from Valeri males?" The question caused another ripple of shock through the chamber. Thiessen actually gasped, while Valessa made a choking sound. But Kithara, after a moment's hesitation, stepped even closer. "Your bone structure is broader," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Valeri males are more delicate, more similar to our females in build. Your muscle definition is pronounced. We can see the individual groups beneath your skin." Her hand rose unconsciously, stopping just short of touching his shoulder. "And the hair patterns. Valeri have no body hair beyond their heads. Would you like to understand more about human anatomy?" Jason asked, surprised by his own boldness. For diplomatic purposes, of course, the offer hung between them, loaded with implications. Kithara's breathing had quickened, and Jason could see the pulse point at her throat fluttering rapidly. Around them, the crystal chamber seemed to respond to the tension, its blue glow deepening. Kithara started, then stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. "Yes, for the sake of interspecies understanding." She extended her hand slowly, giving him every opportunity to refuse. When he didn't, her fingertips made contact with his shoulder, and both of them inhaled sharply. Her skin was cooler than human normal, smooth as silk, and the touch sent an unexpected jolt through Jason's nervous system. "Your skin is warmer than ours," she observed, her scientific training taking over even as her personal reactions threatened to overwhelm her. "And the texture rougher, but not unpleasantly so." Her touch moved to his collarbone, tracing the line of bone beneath skin with careful precision. The bone density appears greater than Valeri's standard. Is this typical for your species? Human males generally have denser bone structure and more muscle mass than females. Jason explained, trying to keep his voice steady as her exploration continued. It's an evolutionary adaptation. Evolution, she breathed, her palm now resting flat against his chest, over his heart. The same forces that shaped us both, yet created such different results. The moment stretched between them, no longer purely scientific. Jason could feel the rapid flutter of her pulse where her wrist pressed against his skin, could see the way her amber eyes had darkened with something beyond curiosity. "Kithara," he said softly. She looked up at him, and for a moment, the cultural barriers between them seemed as translucent as the crystal walls around them. Yes, in human culture, when we're trying to understand someone deeply, we often start with honesty about what we're feeling. He reached up slowly, covering her hand with his own. "Right now, I'm feeling like this cultural exchange has become something neither of us expected." Her cheeks flushed that deeper blue again. "Among my people, such honesty would typically come only after months of careful courtship. Yet with you," she paused, searching for words, "I find myself wanting to understand everything about your species, about you. The council will need to know about this interaction," Valessa said quietly from behind them, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely disapproving. "Yes," Kithara agreed, not moving away from Jason's touch. "They will want to understand how human boldness affects our diplomatic protocols." Thiessen, who had been recording again, looked up from her device. "Ambassador, the readings from the chamber's emotional resonance crystals are unprecedented. Good or bad?" Jason asked. "Neither," Kithara replied, her thumb unconsciously stroking across his knuckles. "Simply new, like everything about this encounter." She stepped back then, though her hand lingered in his for a moment longer than necessary. "Dr. Wells, Jason, I believe we need to continue this cultural exchange in a more private setting. There are protocols to observe, reports to file, and questions to answer," he finished, finally buttoning his shirt back up, though he noticed how her eyes followed the movement with what looked like regret. "Many questions," she agreed. "Perhaps you would join me for the evening meal? There's much about human customs I find myself eager to understand." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Jason caught Thiessen's quiet comment to Valessa, "I don't think the ambassador has ever been this interested in xenobiology before." Valessa's response was equally soft, but carried clearly in the crystalline space. "I don't think this is entirely about science anymore." Jason glanced at Kithara, who had obviously heard the exchange as well. The look she gave him held promise, curiosity, and something that transcended the boundaries between their species, a recognition that what had started as a misunderstanding might become something far more significant than either of them had anticipated. Kithara's private quarters were a revelation in themselves, nothing like the stark diplomatic spaces Jason had grown accustomed to during negotiations. Soft bioluminescent panels cast warm amber light across walls adorned with flowing Valeri, art that seemed to move and shift when viewed peripherally. The furniture was organic in design, grown rather than built, with surfaces that adapted to their occupants' forms. "This is beautiful," Jason said, running his fingers along a table that rippled slightly at his touch. "It feels alive." "It is, in a sense," Kithara replied, watching his wonder with obvious pleasure. "Valeri architecture involves symbiotic relationships with crystalline organisms. They respond to our emotions, our needs." She paused, a faint smile playing at her lips. "They seem quite fascinated by you, actually. I've never seen them react so actively to a non-Valeri presence." Indeed, Jason could see the subtle changes in the room's lighting, the way surfaces seemed to shift and adjust as he moved. "What are they responding to? Curiosity, perhaps, or?" Kithara's cheeks took on that deeper blue hue again. "Emotional resonance. They're very sensitive to attraction, to the biochemical markers of interest between potential mates." The word mates hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address its implications directly. Instead, Kithara gestured to a seating area where what appeared to be dinner had been arranged. An array of foods in colors and textures unlike anything in human cuisine. I took the liberty of researching human dietary requirements, she said, indicating several dishes. These should be compatible with your biology. Though I confess I'm curious about your reactions to Valeri cuisine. As they settled onto the adaptive seating, Jason found himself acutely aware of her proximity. The way her golden curls caught the ambient light, the graceful movements of her hands as she served their meal. You mentioned that my boldness impressed your council. Kithra's laugh was like crystalline chimes. Impressed is one word for it. Shock might be more accurate. But yes, they found your casual approach to physical exposure notable. Among Valeri, such audacity would indicate either insanity or extraordinary confidence. And which do they think I am, after reviewing the recordings and my initial report? She met his eyes directly. They believe you represent something entirely new, a species that approaches vulnerability from a completely different angle than our own. Jason tasted one of the dishes, a delicate flavor that seemed to change as he chewed, starting sweet and ending with a pleasant tingle. This is incredible. What is it? Essence bloom. It responds to the taster's biochemistry, adapting its flavor to complement their individual biology. Kithara watched his reaction carefully. The fact that it's adapting to you so readily is significant. How so? Essence bloom is traditionally shared between bonded pairs. It's said to enhance compatibility, to help partners understand each other on a fundamental level. Her voice grew softer. I've never seen it respond so positively to someone outside a mating bond. The implications of her words settled between them like a warm weight. Jason set down his utensil, studying her face. Kithara, can I ask you something that might be very personal after this afternoon? I think we've moved beyond conventional boundaries of personal and professional. What happens in Valeri courtship? How do your people connect? She was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes reflecting the room's shifting lights. It's a gradual process. We begin with intellectual compatibility, sharing thoughts, ideas, dreams. Then emotional intimacy develops over months or sometimes years. Physical closeness comes very slowly first, permitted touch of hands, then perhaps shoulders or arms, and beyond that, the blue flush spread from her cheeks down her neck. The reveal of physical form is sacred. It happens only when two souls have decided to bond permanently. The first time partners see each other unclothed is often the same night they join for life. Jason felt a weight settle in his chest. Then what I did today was unprecedented, she finished softly. You revealed yourself to me as if I were already your chosen mate, as if the barriers between us didn't exist. I'm sorry. I never meant to. Don't apologize. She reached across the small table, her fingers intertwining with his. What you did was shocking, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I encountered someone who approached vulnerability without fear, without elaborate ritual or hesitation. Her thumb traced across his knuckles, and Jason felt that now familiar jolt of connection. May I tell you something that I haven't reported to the council? Of course. When you stood before me today, when you removed your garments without shame or ceremony, I felt something I've never experienced before. Not just curiosity, but desire, the wish to understand you not just intellectually, but physically, intimately. The room around them seemed to pulse with warmth, the bioluminescent panels responding to their elevated emotions. Jason squeezed her hand gently. In human culture, that kind of honesty is how we begin true intimacy with emotional truth. Show me, she whispered. Show you what? How humans approach physical intimacy. Not the casual exposure from today, but the intentional kind, the kind that means something. Jason's heart rate doubled. Kithara, are you sure? I don't want to push beyond your cultural comfort zones. My culture has never encountered yours before, she replied, standing slowly and drawing him up with her. Perhaps it's time to discover what new traditions we might create together. She led him to another area of her quarters, where bioluminescent flowers cast dancing shadows on the walls. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as she began the slow process of removing her outer diplomatic robes, not with his casual efficiency from earlier, but with ceremonial grace. In Valeri tradition, this moment would be preceded by years of courtship, she said softly. letting the first layer of fabric fall away. But you've shown me that perhaps some barriers are meant to be crossed more boldly. Jason watched, mesmerized, as she revealed herself slowly, the elegant lines of her shoulders, the graceful curve of her neck, skinned like polished moonstone. When she paused, looking suddenly uncertain, he stepped closer. In human tradition, he said gently, "We might start like this." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs tracing the delicate bone structure beneath her skin, with touch that means trust. When he leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway, and the contact was electric literally, as the room's responsive environment flared with brilliant light before settling into a warm, intimate glow. "The plants approve," she murmured against his lips. "What about you?" he asked. "I think," she said, her hands moving to explore the solid warmth of his chest, "that I'm beginning to understand why your species approaches intimacy with such boldness. There's something beautiful about honest desire." As they continued their careful exploration of each other, her wonder at his human warmth and strength, his fascination with her alien grace, and the way her skin seemed to glow from within, Jason realized that what had begun as a cultural misunderstanding was becoming something far more profound. A bridge between worlds, built from curiosity, desire, and the courage to be vulnerable in entirely new ways. 3 days after their private evening together, Jason found himself standing before the full Valeri Cultural Council, wearing formal diplomatic attire and trying to ignore the way Kithara's eyes lingered on him from her position at the council table. The chamber was grander than any he'd seen before. Crystalline spires reached toward a dome that showed the swirling colors of the nebula beyond the station, while bioluminescent arrays cast shifting patterns across the assembled delegates. "Dr. Wells," spoke Elder Rithen, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries, "your unconventional approach to our purity ritual has created considerable discussion among our people." Jason inclined his head respectfully. "I understand my actions were culturally inappropriate, Elder. I hope my subsequent research into Valeri customs has helped clarify any misunderstandings." Indeed, Rithen's eyes held a glimmer of what might have been amusement. "Ambassador, Kithara's reports on human physiology and cultural practices have been most thorough." Several council members made soft sounds that Jason was learning to recognize as Valeri laughter. Kithara's cheeks took on that telltale deeper blue hue, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. "The council has decided," continued Elder Rithen, "that your demonstration revealed something significant about human nature that could benefit our ongoing cultural exchange. We would like you to present a formal educational session on human approaches to physical form and vulnerability." "I would be honored," Jason replied, though he caught the meaningful look Kithara sent him across the chamber. 2 hours later, Jason stood before an assembly of Valeri scholars, scientists, and cultural experts. This time, he was fully prepared for what he was doing. He'd spent the morning working with Kithara to develop a presentation that would satisfy Valeri's scientific curiosity while respecting both cultures' boundaries. "Human beings," he began, activating a holographic display that showed basic anatomical charts, "evolved as social creatures who used physical cooperation for survival. Our lack of natural coverings like fur or scales meant we developed clothing for protection, not modesty." The assembled Valeri listened with rapt attention as he explained human biology, the differences in bone density and muscle structure that Kithara had noted, the evolutionary adaptations that had shaped their species. When he reached the section on human attitudes toward physical intimacy, he caught sight of Kithara in the front row, her amber eyes fixed on him with obvious pride. Unlike Valeri, who treat physical revelation as the culmination of emotional bonding, humans often use physical intimacy as one pathway to emotional connection. Both approaches have merit. They simply represent different cultural solutions to the same fundamental need for closeness and understanding. After the presentation, as the scholars dispersed with animated discussions about comparative xenobiology, Kithara approached him with a smile that made his pulse quicken. "That was beautifully done," she said, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that would have been scandalous by Valeri standards a week ago. "The council was impressed by your cultural sensitivity. I had an excellent consultant, he replied, enjoying the way her eyes lit up at the compliment. Jason, she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, would you join me tonight? I have something I'd like to share with you. That evening, Kithara led him through sections of the station he'd never seen before, past chambers filled with growing crystal formations and pools of luminescent water that responded to their footsteps with ripples of color. Where are we going? He asked, though he was content to follow her anywhere. To a place sacred to my people, she replied, pausing before an archway that seemed to be made of living light. The bonding gardens. Traditionally, this is where Valeri couples come to formalize their connection. Jason's breath caught. Kithara, are you saying? I'm saying that you've taught me something about boldness, she said, turning to face him. The light from the archway cast her in shifting hues of blue and gold, making her look ethereal. About taking risks for the sake of connection, she reached up to touch his face, her cool fingers tracing the line of his jaw. In 3 days, you've shown me more about intimacy than years of traditional courtship might have revealed. You've helped me understand that vulnerability can be a gift, not just something to be earned. What are you asking? He said softly, though his heart was already racing with possibility. I'm asking if you would be willing to learn Valeri traditions, as I've been learning human ones. Her eyes held his steadily. I'm asking if you might consider staying, not just for the cultural exchange, but for us. Jason's answer was to kiss her deeply and thoroughly, while the living archway pulsed with warm light around them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I'd like nothing more, he said. But are you sure? What about your people, your career, the differences between us? My people have already accepted that you represent something new in our experience, she replied, her hands moving to the fastenings of his formal jacket. As for our differences, I think they complement each other beautifully. The bonding gardens beyond the archway were unlike anything Jason had ever imagined. Pools of warm, glowing water surrounded by crystal formations that sang soft harmonies. When the breeze moved through them, bioluminescent flowers carpeted the ground, creating paths of light that led to secluded groves designed for privacy. In traditional Valeri bonding, Kithara explained as she led him to one of these groves, partners spend their first night together in gradual revelation, each stage of undressing, accompanied by declarations of commitment, promises for the future. And in human tradition, she asked, beginning to unfasten her own garments with the ceremonial care her culture demanded. We might start with this, Jason said, pulling her close and letting his hands explore the graceful curve of her spine, the delicate architecture of her shoulders, with touch that says I choose you. What followed was a careful blend of both their cultures, the deliberate reverence of Valeri tradition combined with the emotional directness of human intimacy. They took their time discovering each other, Jason marveling at the way her skin seemed to generate its own soft light, Kithara fascinated by the solid warmth of his human form. Your skin tells stories, she whispered, tracing a small scar on his shoulder. This is from your research on Kepler 440b, isn't it? How did you know? I've memorized every detail of your personnel file, she admitted with a soft laugh. I wanted to understand everything about the human who walked into our ritual chamber and changed everything. Later, as they lay entwined in the soft grass, beneath stars that seemed to pulse in rhythm with their heartbeats, Kithara traced patterns on his chest, while the garden's responsive environment created a private aurora just for them. I have something to tell you, she said quietly. What? The council didn't just approve our cultural exchange continuation. They've asked me to establish a permanent human-Valeri relations post. She looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the dancing lights above them. They want you to be my co-director. Jason felt his world shift in the best possible way. Are you asking me to stay permanently? I'm asking you to build a life with me, she said simply. To help our peoples understand each other, to create something new from the best of both our worlds. His answer was wordless, but complete, expressed in the way he held her close while the bonding gardens sang their approval, in harmonies of light and sound that would echo in both their hearts for years to come. 6 months later, the Intercultural Exchange Dome had been transformed from a sterile diplomatic facility into something unprecedented in galactic history, a living symbol of interspecies cooperation that drew visitors from across the known systems. The crystalline chambers now housed permanent research facilities, cultural exchange programs, and living quarters for the growing community of humans and Valeri, who had chosen to build their lives at the intersection of two worlds. Jason Wells, now Director Wells of the Human Valeri Cultural Institute, stood in the central pavilion, reviewing the morning schedule with his co-director and bonded partner, Kithara. Her official title was Ambassador Director, but to Jason, she would always be the woman who had transformed a moment of cultural collision into something beautiful. "The delegation from the Terran Federation arrives at midday," she said, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing, even after months together. The simple pleasure of casual touch, something that had scandalized her people initially, still made her amber eyes light up with wonder. "And the Valeri Youth Cultural Immersion Group this afternoon," Jason added, checking his tablet. "They're particularly excited about the Human Boldness Workshop." Kithara laughed, the sound like crystalline music that had become the soundtrack to his days. "I still can't believe that's what they're calling your lectures on human approaches to vulnerability and risk-taking. It's better than the alternative names they suggested." Jason replied with a grin, "Though I have to admit, teaching young Valeri about human directness has been one of the most rewarding aspects of this job indeed." The cultural exchange programs they'd developed had exceeded everyone's expectations. Young Valeri learned to approach challenges with human-style boldness, while human visitors discovered the profound intimacy that came from Valeri-style emotional patience. The synthesis of approaches had created entirely new therapeutic and educational techniques that were being adopted across multiple species. Dr. Wells, Ambassador Director, Thiessen approached, her role having evolved from simple scholar to head of the Institute's research division. "The participants for today's new bonding ceremony are ready." Jason and Kithara exchanged a look that held 6 months of shared history, private jokes, and deep contentment. The new bonding ceremony was their proudest innovation, a ritual that combined elements from both cultures to celebrate unions between humans and Valeri, or even between members of the same species who wanted to honor both traditions. They walked together to the ceremonial chamber, a space that had been redesigned to incorporate both the austere beauty of Valeri crystal architecture and the organic warmth that humans craved. Today's ceremony would join 3 couples, 2 human Valeri pairs and 1 Valeri couple, who had chosen to incorporate human elements into their traditional bonding. "Nervous?" Kithara asked softly as they took their positions as officiants. "With you never," Jason replied, squeezing her hand. The ceremony began with the traditional Valeri elements, the gradual revelation of emotional commitment, the formal declarations of intent, the careful choreography of intellectual and spiritual bonding. But then came the innovations they'd developed together, the human tradition of exchanged vows that spoke to bold promises and direct emotional truth. In the tradition of the Valeri, Kithara spoke to the assembled couples, "We believe that true bonding comes from the patient cultivation of understanding, the slow revelation of the self to another, the sacred trust of physical intimacy as the ultimate expression of spiritual connection." In the tradition of humanity, Jason continued, "We believe that love requires courage, the boldness to be vulnerable, the willingness to risk emotional exposure, the strength to offer our whole selves without guarantee of reciprocation. Today," they said together, having practiced this moment until it felt like a dance, "we celebrate the joining of these traditions, the careful patience of Valeri wisdom with the brave immediacy of human heart." As each couple exchanged their vows, some in the flowing, ceremonial language of the Valeri, others in the direct, emotional style of human promises, Jason found his thoughts drifting to his own bonding ceremony with Kithara 3 months ago. It had been the first official human Valeri union, witnessed by representatives from both governments and broadcast across the galaxy, as a symbol of what was possible when different worlds chose understanding over fear. The ceremony concluded with the newest tradition of all, one that had emerged organically from their community over the past months. Instead of the traditional separation that concluded formal Valeri ceremonies, or the celebratory gathering that marked human weddings. The new tradition called for all participants to share in the circle of understanding. Couples, witnesses, and officiants joined hands in a large circle, while the chamber's responsive crystals created a light show that reflected the emotional resonance of everyone present. It was a moment of unity that transcended species boundaries, a visual representation of the connections they were all building together. The circle acknowledges, Jason began the closing words, that love is not limited by the shape of our bodies or the customs of our birth worlds. The circle celebrates, Kithara continued, that understanding grows strongest when different perspectives choose to intertwine. The circle declares, they finish together, that the future belongs to those brave enough to build bridges across the spaces between stars. As the ceremony concluded and the couples were surrounded by congratulations from friends and family, Jason and Kithara stepped onto the pavilion's observation deck. Below them, the dome bustled with activity, human children playing games taught to them by Valeri elders, mixed groups of scientists collaborating on research projects that neither species could have imagined alone, couples of various combinations, walking hand in hand through gardens that responded to their contentment with displays of bioluminescent joy. Look what we built, Kithara said softly, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the life they'd helped create. Look what we're still building, Jason corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind. The applications for next year's programs are already exceeding our capacity. The Terran Federation wants to establish 5 more facilities like this one, she added. And the Valeri Republic is considering opening their first human cultural center on the homeworld. All because of a misunderstanding about a ritual, Jason mused. All because you were brave enough to be vulnerable, Kithara corrected, turning in his arms to face him, and because I was curious enough to see past my own cultural assumptions. What do you think our peoples will create together in the next 100 years? He asked, enjoying the way the setting sun cast golden highlights in her curly hair. I think, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him, that we're going to discover things about connection and understanding that neither of our species ever dreamed possible. As if in response to her words, the dome's crystalline structure began to sing a harmonic resonance that occurred when the facility's bioresponsive systems detected high levels of contentment and hope among its inhabitants. It was a sound that had become the anthem of their community, a reminder that some of the most beautiful music could only be created when different instruments chose to play in harmony. Same time tomorrow, Jason asked as they prepared to head home to the quarters they now shared, a space that perfectly blended Valeri flowing architecture with human need for defined spaces and solid surfaces. Same time tomorrow, Kithara agreed, though I suspect tomorrow's challenges will be completely different from today's. They always are, Jason replied, taking her hand as they walked toward their future together. That's what makes it interesting. Behind them, the dome continued its evening song, a crystalline celebration of the truth they'd discovered together, that the greatest adventures often began with the simplest misunderstandings, and that love in all its forms was the most powerful force for building bridges across the vast spaces between worlds. In the months and years that followed, their story would become legend among both species, the tale of the human who dared to be vulnerable and the Valeri who chose to be bold, and how their meeting had changed the trajectory of galactic civilization itself. But in that moment, walking hand in hand through the community they'd helped create, they were simply Jason and Kithara, partners, lovers, and proof that sometimes the most profound connections were forged in the space between one heartbeat and the next.